Kurdran was already climbing down from Skyree's back, while her talons were still digging into the earth, and strode up to Trollian, where he and Ilaria and Khadgar waited. Trollian's pleasure at seeing the dwarf was dampened, however, by the dwarf's stiff, slow gait, and changed to confusion by the strange, hunched figure that dismounted and scurried after him. "Ah, I'm glad to see ye all," Kurdran said, clasping hands with Trollian and Khadgar in turn and kissing Ilaria's hand. "Ah, it were a near thing too, for those green beasts captured me, they did." Trollian frowned and studied his short friend. "I'm glad you escaped." "Nay, rescued I was, and healed up right proper," Kurdran corrected. "The lad Danis sprung me and stormed their great ruin to boot. Called Auchenduin it were. Found ourselves a strange-looking friend there, who might teach even ye a thing or two about healing with the light. Good thing too, I wasn't at me best." Trollian looked with fresh admiration at his friend. What Kurdran had said amounted to a confession of being at death's door. "I'm glad," he said fervently. Ye'll nae be so good about the next part." Ner'zhul got away. He and his pet Death Knight cast a spell that took them straight to a place called the Black Temple, and we couldn't have stopped them. Trollian sighed and placed his hand on Kurdran's shoulder. "Don't worry, Kurdran. I know you and Danis did your best. I'm grateful you're all right." He ran a hand through his hair, thinking. Black Temple. Sounds ominous. What do we know about it? "Nay much, but yon feathered creature here will take us to it." Kurdran jerked a thumb at the figure who had accompanied him atop Skyree. It bowed obsequiously. "This is Grizzak. He led Danith into Auchenduin, and then Danith found his way to me." "Grizzak knows," it stated, its voice high and reedy. I tell ye, Black Temple, I know what and where." "Is this your benefactor?" Ilaria asked. "The one who healed you?" Nay, that's a Draenei. It does get complicated." "Then what are you?" Ilaria asked softly, and Trollian realized even her elven eyes had pierced the shadows of the heavy cowl that hid Grizzak's face. "I, Arakkoa," Grizzak answered, flinging back his cowl, and Trollian tried not to start at this stranger's long beak and feathered hair. "We born of this world, as we are orcs. Long have Arakkoa kept to ourselves. Little have we to do with orcs or Draenei." Then orcs rose up, banding together, forming horde, slaughtered Draenei. "Auchenduin was the Draenei burial city," Kurdran explained. "So Grizzak's told me." "And Black Temple, theirs as well," Grizzak added. "Though it was not called that then. There Draenei made their last stand, and there my brethren and I too came to fight orcs." His eyes glittered with what Trollian took for rage, though there seemed something malicious in them as well. "We failed, though not from lack of arms. Orcs have sorcerer, Gul'dan. He very strong. He alter earth itself, raising great volcano in our midst." "Orcs have sorcerer, Gul'dan. He very strong. He alter earth itself, raising great volcano in our midst." Now his small eyes clearly blazed with anger. "Gul'dan, eh?" Khadgar swung the sack down from his shoulder, opened it, and pulled out the skull. "Here's all that's left of him. He won't be causing you any more trouble," the young old mage told Arakkoa before dropping the skull back inside with a quickly concealed look of relief. Grizzak's eyes were wide. "You slew Gul'dan?" he asked, his voice a breathy whisper. "No," Trollian admitted. "Someone else got to him first, but we have destroyed the Horde's power and broken one of its major strongholds. Now we just need to reach the Black Temple, find Ner'zhul, and kill him as well." The Arakoa bobbed his head. I can show you the way, he assured them. Charlian caught Kurdran's eye, and the Wild Hammer leader shrugged. Charlian understood. The clever dwarf wasn't sure whether to trust Grizzak either, but what choice did they have? Thank you, he told the Arakoa. We welcome your help. He turned to Kurdran. We'll draw up a rough map tonight, based on Grizzak's information, he said. Tomorrow, I want you to head back to Daneth. We'll decide where to meet up for the final assault. Kurdran nodded. Aye, lad, that's a fine plan. He agreed. Now who's got ale for me, and some food? Once I'm refreshed, I'll tell you the full of our trek and the battle at Auchenduin. Charlian smiled. I can't wait to hear it, he told the dwarf, and it was true. He caught Illyria's eye and smiled as she slipped her hand into his. Tomorrow they would begin the march again, but for tonight at least, they could sit and drink and listen to the Wild Hammer's, no doubt, colorful tale. Several days later, they rode between two low mountain ranges and saw a wide valley stretch out before them. Kurdran had found them when they were almost level with what Charlian now knew the orcs called Hellfire Citadel and the Dark Portal. Grizzak had led them farther south and then east, skirting the waters the Arakoa had told them were called the Devouring Sea. There, at the very edge of the land, stood the Black Temple, where the Shadow Moon Valley ran up against the mountains that dropped off into the raging sea. And it was there that Daneth and the rest of the Alliance army were waiting for them. Daneth and the others had not been idle, Charlian saw as he reined in. A crude but effective camp stood near the southwest edge of the valley, and the thick log walls were already half erected around it. Kurdran's idea, Daneth said, as he approached them, clasping Charlian's hand in greeting. He felt we needed a place where we could keep an eye on things across the valley, and this struck us both as a good vantage point. Charlian nodded. It was indeed that. From there they could see all the way across to the land's edge, including the massive volcano rising up in the center and billowing smoke and ash and lava in every direction. Aye, and it's best we were summoned, as you didn't need to set foot on the ground, Kurdran added as he joined them. That lava's green, if ye cannot tell from here, and the very ground's saturated with it. Khadgar nodded, and Charlian noticed the pained expression on his friend's face. Fell magic, he whispered hoarsely. The purest I've ever seen. The Archmage shook his head. I don't even want to know what sort of spells Gul'dan worked to cause this. It's a violation of nature itself. No wonder this world is dying. He frowned at Kurdran. Keep your people as far from that thing as possible, he warned, and don't enter the valley any more than necessary. Charlian glanced over at Daneth, who nodded. We laid siege to the temple as soon as we arrived, he explained. I didn't want to risk them getting reinforcements. Good. Charlian turned to the others. We need to get over there ourselves. Khadgar, you're the key here. We need you to take out Ner'zhul and stop his spell. Illyria, you and your rangers protect him from long-range attacks. Shoot down anything that even looks his way. I'll be right beside him to take care of anything close by. We smash through the defenses, find Ner'zhul, kill him, take back the artifacts, and get the hell out. Agreed? Absolutely, Khadgar agreed, and the others nodded as well. Good. Charlian sighed and said a quick prayer, calling down the holy light's protection upon them all. He felt it pouring over them all, warm and calming, and thanked it. He clasped hands with Kurdran, Daneth, and Khadgar, then turned to Illyria. She smiled bravely up at him, but she knew, as he did, the risk. Illyria, thank the light. They had not been so stupid as to still be shunning one another. Instead, they had found strength and comfort in each other. He folded her close for a long moment, resting his chin on her shining hair, then tilted her head up to kiss her. Pulling back, he gave her his best smile and hefted his hammer. "Let's go." They charged across the valley, the remaining Alliance forces right behind them. Only a handful of men stayed behind to guard the camp. As they raced around the volcano, Trallian saw the Black Temple for the first time, and only his faith kept him from jerking his horse to stop and then kicking it into a gallop in any other direction. This place was enormous, towering over even the volcano jutting up from the valley floor, carved of some stone that perhaps had been bright green, but was now coated in ash and other foul substances that swallowed the light. It loomed like a piece of shadow given solid form, squat and ugly and dangerous, mocking the army that threw itself against its walls. Trallian could tell that every surface was heavily carved, though he could not make out details yet, and the top of the central portion had protrusions that reminded him of a hand grasping at the sky. Even as Trallian tried to take it all in, his horse stumbled, and he was nearly thrown as the earth rocked beneath him. Lightning, green and loud and ominous, and crackling with darkness instead of illumination, shattered the skies. His horse whickered in terror and reared. Its rider was only marginally less frightened, but did his best to calm the animal. "What's going on?" he shouted at Khadgar over the roll of thunder. "The skies are right," Khadgar shouted back. "I fear that." His words were snatched away as the earth shook again and the skies flashed green. Trallian saw another flash, and his head whipped up. The portion that evoked the image of a hand reaching for the skies, it was glowing. "Oh no," he breathed and turned to Khadgar. "I was right," Khadgar yelled. "Ner'zhul has begun his spell." "Can we still stop him?" "I can," Khadgar answered grimly. "Just get me there in time." Consider it done. Trallian raised his hammer high overhead and summoned his faith, channeling it into the blessed weapon. The hammer's surface began to glow, the light spreading as it grew, until it shone so brightly the volcano dimmed alongside it. The orcs and death knights battling before the Black Temple turned away, blinded, but the light did not sear Alliance eyes, and his soldiers cheered as Trallian galloped past them, his hammer burning a path through the temple's defenders, until one figure stepped out into his path. "Your little light does not frighten me," Taran Gorfin called out, a jeweled truncheon in his hand. It was obvious to anyone with eyes that the Death Knight was lying. He had let his hood fall back, and his hideous, decaying face and burning red eyes were plainly visible. That face was contorted with pain, and the body strained as if wanting to flee of its own accord. Gorfin lifted the strange weapon it held. It glowed with a multicolored light, and that varied radiance battered at Trallian's glow, attempting to overpower it. "The holy light is all that you are not, monster," Trallian shouted in reply, pointing the hammer at Gorfin and loosing a burst of light like a missile. "If you do not fear it, then embrace it." The burst struck Gorfin, but he swept his truncheon before him, and it scattered Trallian's attack, diffusing the brilliant white into rays of color. Then the Death Knight struck in turn. He leveled his truncheon at Trallian, and a shadow emerged from its tip, engulfing the Alliance commander. Trallian felt the darkness constrict, smothering his light and his limbs simultaneously, and fought against it, writhing to break free. Air passed beneath him, and he hit the ground hard, rolling and struggling. Clearly the attack had carried him from his horse, but the darkness stayed on him, pressing him down into the earth. He gasped for air, but as long as he refused to inflate, refused to obey his commands, he'd fallen, Of course he had. He was not even good enough to stay atop his horse. What kind of general was he? His troops would die too. He'd led them straight to their deaths. Lothar would be so ashamed of him. Trollian spasmed on the earth, willing himself to breathe, but tendrils of darkness wrapped around his chest, crushing it. Snake-like, they wound up around him, pinning his arms to his sides, forcing their way into his mouth, his nostrils, his eyes. Ah, it burned. Tears spilled from tightly closed lids, but only inflamed the fire. And so he would die, a failure, a catastrophe. All those deaths would be on his head. Those innocents in other worlds, gaping in horror as the vast green tide swept over them. The men who had believed him when he told them the light would be with them. Light? What light? Where was it now that it mattered? Ilaria. Dead too, she would be, joining her family, cursing him in whatever afterlife the elves believed in. She never loved him, he saw that now. He was a toy, one she would have outlived, one she'd have moved on from. Khadgar, Kurdran, Daneth. The dark tendrils tightened. Trollian opened his eyes, staring blankly. I'm sorry, Lothar. I failed you. I'm not you. I led them. He blinked. He led them the best he had known how. No, he wasn't Anduin Lothar, the Lion of Azeroth. Only Lothar could be Lothar. It would be the height of arrogance to assume otherwise. He was Trollian, and the light was with him. It hadn't failed him yet. Not when he had prayed with his whole heart. Just ask. That's all you have to do is ask, with a pure heart. That's why Lothar picked you. Not because he thought you'd be him, because he knew you'd be you. Trollian took a shallow breath, constrained by the dark tendrils, and prayed. He opened his eyes, and he knew, without understanding how he knew it, that they were shining with pure white radiance. He looked down at the tendrils of darkness, and they melted, retreated, as shadows must ever retreat before the light. His chest heaved with a great breath, and he clambered to his feet and grabbed his hammer, swinging it through what remained of the shadows. The attack had lasted only a few seconds, though it felt like an eternity. Gorfine had used the diversion to creep closer, and when Trollian could see and move freely again, he realized the Death Knight was only a few feet away. His red eyes widened as Trollian took a step forward. Clearly, he had not expected the young Alliance commander to win free so quickly, if at all, and he was not prepared for the heavy blow Trollian's hammer struck him full in the chest. Trollian was sure he heard bones snap beneath the worn armor, and the Death Knight stumbled back, though did not fall. You cannot win, Gorfine hissed through gritted teeth. I am already dead. What is the worst you could do to me? His truncheon jabbed forward, catching Trollian in the stomach and doubling him over, and Gorfine's hand brushed the back of Trollian's helm. Instantly, pain blossomed in Trollian's head, as if a vice had gripped his helm and was squeezing it tight onto his temples and skull. Stars exploded behind his eyes, and he felt the world tilt crazily around him. In desperation, he swung his hammer again, a mighty two-handed arc, and felt the heavy head strike something solid. There was a rattle and a gasp, and the pain vanished. Blinking away spots and taking a deep, racking breath to clear his head, Trollian glanced up in time to see Gorfine stagger a step, one arm hanging limp. While the Death Knight was in off balance, Trollian lurched forward, hammer raised high. He summoned his faith to him once again, and the radiance shone from his limbs and from his weapon, too bright to look upon as he advanced upon his foe. The Death Knight cried out, raising his hands to shield his eyes from the radiance. which was now actually starting to make his flesh smoke and curl. "By the light," Turalyon cried. Praise, prayer, and promise all in one. The light flared brightly, so brightly, and as he brought the hammer down, it did more than simply crush the reanimated body. It cleaved through it. The light carved an arc through Terran Gorfiend, ripping through him until the dead flesh fell in a soggy, reeking heap. A horrible wailing pierced Turalion's ears, and he staggered back, staring in horror and disbelief as the jagged, shrieking wisp that was Terran Gorfiend's soul twisted upward from the wreckage of his body. The paladin lifted the glowing hammer and swung once more, but he was a fraction of a second too late, and the spirit was gone, shrieking in pain and frustration, fleeing into the crackling green and black sky. "Come on," came Ilaria's voice, startling Turalyon. His heart swelled to see her. He quickly leapt atop his horse and galloped toward her. Riding ahead of them was Khadgar, and they caught up quickly. The Death Knight had been the temple's last barrier. Now they were within the Black Temple itself, and faced the long stairs winding up toward the top, and the sickly light that pulsed forth from that height. Ilaria, Khadgar, Daneth, Kurdran. Damn it. They were not all going to die here. With a physical shake of his head, Turalyon dispelled the last of the shadow's hold on him, gripped his hammer, and rode toward his destiny.